Good morning, everybody. This is Rabbi Leah, and I want to thank you for joining me this morning as we begin our commemoration for Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the month of Av. According to Jewish tradition, this is considered to be the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, and for good reason. This is the day on which Jews observe and remember all of the catastrophes and the calamities that have befallen us for thousands of years, and there have been lots of them. But primarily the two that we focus on during this holiday, not this holiday, but this commemoration, are the destructions of the temple in Jerusalem. And we were sadly victimized twice in this way, both circumstances many, many years ago. The first in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, and then again in the year 70 of the Common Era by the Romans. And still, since the year 70, have not rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. So Jews throughout the world will observe this day with mourning and with fasting and with prayer and with the reading of the book of Lamentations, which talks about being in exile and being separated from one's land and one's people. Because in both cases of the destruction of the temples, Jews were carried off to foreign lands, and very rarely did they return. So if you're wondering how we ended up dispersed throughout the world, that was the beginning of the diaspora. And so we observe this day in a somber mode. As I mentioned, fasting is customary. This is one of only 2 days in the entire Jewish calendar during which we have a full fast. The other is, of course, Yom Kippur. And by a full fast, I mean that this starts the night before at sundown, so last night at sundown, going through tonight at nightfall. So it's actually a 25-hour fast. And we also observe some of the other customs and rituals that we do on Yom Kippur, including and those that we observe on when we're sitting Shiva. Not wearing makeup, not showering or bathing, not wearing leather shoes, refraining from marital relations and things of that nature. Most of which traditional Orthodox Jews will observe, and those of us who are part of more progressive movements may or may not. We may do some and not others. But this is certainly a day of mourning, a day of reflection, and not a day on which we engage in any celebratory activities. So we don't sing, we don't dance, we're not supposed to listen to music. And if Tisha B'Av is going to fall, if the ninth of Av ever falls on a Saturday, it's not observed on Shabbat, it's moved to the next day, and so on. So it's a solemn time, and we are our difficulty as 21st century Jews is trying to make some of these ancient calamities resonate with us today. So, for those of you who, like myself, are not necessarily mourning the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, how do we replicate? What kinds of things do we think about that may be akin to that sort of sadness, devastation, and destruction that we perhaps can relate to as moderns living in the year 2020 in San Diego, California, USA? Because we are pretty far removed from historical events that took place 2,000 years ago and almost 2,600 years ago. And yet we can still understand and empathize with how significant those events were. Besides the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, It's also believed that this was a day upon which other calamities took place. And I spoke about that on Tuesday in my Hi There class. And if you want to watch it, I can send you the link and you can watch it if you missed it. But today, what I want to focus on is liturgy. And some of it is ancient liturgy from our sacred texts, and some of it is more modern liturgy. But it's all in the mode of Tisha B'Av, which is laments, dirges, sad poetry, and so on. However, even in a traditional synagogue, if there's a Torah reading in the morning, it's a Torah reading that focuses on more heavy and sad themes, or the Haftarah, excuse me. But then by the afternoon service, the mood is already starting to lighten a little bit. So I'm going to be reading a lot of different things for you. And since you don't have a copy of this in front of you, what I invite you to do is just simply listen. Close your eyes if you find that you can focus and concentrate better with your eyes closed. And just kind of allow the words to seep into you and around you and marinate within you. And hopefully something will provide you with meaning and solace on this very solemn day. Certainly, if there is something that I sing that you want to join in on and you know it, or you even want to just hum along, please feel free to do so. Turn us, Adonai, eternal, toward you, and we will turn. Make our days new again, like long ago. That is a verse from Lamentations, chapter 5, verse 21, Hashivenu. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Ve'na shuva, Ve'na shuva, Chadish, Chadish, Yameinu kekedem. In ancient times, we connected to the divine mainly through sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem, which became the focus of religion, politics, and national pride for many centuries. In about 586 BCE, the temple was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire, and many were brought to Babylon as slaves. This led to a great challenge to our very existence. Our philosophy, theology, and society had to change. When we were permitted to return and rebuild our temple, we faced the consequences of these changes. A society split between our homeland and the new communities in Babylonia. Centuries later, under the Roman Empire, King Herod expanded the temple complex to include the Western Wall, which many of us have seen in person or in pictures. This temple was violently destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE after a devastating siege of Jerusalem. And once again, we were thrown into exile. According to tradition, both temples were destroyed on the 9th day of the month of Av. And on this day, we observe a day of mourning and remembrance for these and numerous other massacres, tragedies, and terrible events which have been experienced on that date since then. A Tisha B'Av prayer. Grief, loss, devastation, distress, shock, numbness, denial, apathy, disorganization, confusion, searching, yearning, anxiety, panic, fear, resentment, jealousy, anger, hate, blame, terror, rage, sadness, depression, guilt, regret, isolation. All these feelings and more we will experience in our lives. We often find ways to distract ourselves from the full depth of our emotions. But today we open the floodgates and we sit with those feelings we would rather avoid. We can make space enough inside us to hold all these different emotions. Today we take the time to get to know how we react to these feelings, how we redirect them into others. When we open up to grief and sit in darkness, we learn to be better human beings and light the way for others. Help us open not just to private grief, but to communal grief for our people and for the suffering in the world. May we learn this Tisha B'Av, that finding rock bottom can be found as a foundation for strength and growth. Amen. The book of Lamentations is known in the Hebrew as Echa. The word Echa actually means how, H-O-W, how. And it comes from the first words of the first verses. How did we end up here? How did this happen to us? How am I going to deal with this? How am I going to move on? And the verses go like this. Lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among nations is become a widow. The princess among states is become a serf. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheeks wet with tears. There is none to comfort her of all her friends. All her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh. Her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate. Her enemies are now the masters. Her foes are at ease, because the Lord has afflicted her for many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy. From fair Zion, all that were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly before the pursuer. All the precious things she had in the days of old Jerusalem, recalled in her days of woe and sorrow when her people fell by enemy hands, with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. All her inhabitants sigh as they search for bread. They have bartered their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. See, O Lord, and behold how abject I have become. May it never befall you, all who pass along the road. Look about and see. Is there any agony like mine which was dealt out before me? For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might revive my spirit. My children are forlorn, for the foe has prevailed. So you can see, even from the tone of this translation of this part of Lamentations, how devastating this must have been. We don't know exactly who wrote Lamentations. It doesn't say Lamentations by so-and-so, but we clearly get this feeling of the desperation and all these references to Jerusalem as a woman, a widow. Her infants have gone into captivity and so on. It's just a very heavy and oppressive and sad piece of liturgy. Hashivenu, return us. Return us to ourselves, return us to each other, return us to the earth, return us to our land, the land beneath our feet. Return us to this moment. Return us to our knowing, remembering that we know. Return us to our rhymes, return us to our drums. Return us to sleep in the middle of the night. Return us to our deepest desires, our shared loves, our clear visions. Return us to our bodies, to our breath, to breathing easily. Return us to knowing how beautiful we are. Return us to ourselves, return us to each other. Return us to our good questions, our bare feet, our brilliant minds, our singing voices. Return us to falling in love with ourselves and each other. Return us to our shrines and to our shrine keeping. Return us to trusting each other and ourselves. Return us, turn us, and we will dance and be held, and behold that we are whole, and be in harmony with you. Return us, keep turning us, for everything is within us. The Torah will keep coming out of us. For sweetness is within us and longs to return to you. So this theme of Hashivenu, return us, is not just about returning to the land and returning to the normal life and returning to what it was that they had that they no longer have, but it's also a spiritual returning, a returning to God, and a returning to, and as we return to ourselves, we also return to God, because each of us is godly. Each of us has a divine spark within us. Each of us was created in the image of God, and therefore we have divinity. So when we return to God, we also return to ourselves, to who we really are as human beings. So you can see that Tisha B'Av also has many of the themes and the feelings that are going to lead us eventually into the month of Elul, which is the month that precedes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then eventually into Tishrei. So all of this is meant to be a liturgical, spiritual journey that takes us from one point of asking for teshuvah, which also means to return, hashivenu, return us, to a point of, I don't want to use the word purification because it sounds like we were somehow unclean, but to a point of spiritual awareness. I think that is probably the best way for me to define it at this point. So many of the themes in this particular piece about return us to our places of peacemaking, return us to knowing how beautiful we are, return us to falling in love with ourselves, because all of these things allow us to return to God. Please join me in Hashivenu. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Ve'na shuva, Ve'na shuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu kekedem. So I want to take a few moments now just for silent meditation. We're going to allow ourselves, some quiet moments just to think about this. What does it mean to you to return? What does it mean to you to return to God? What does it mean to you to return to yourself? A self with a big capital S, not a little s. Um, what does it mean to find comfort in one's dwelling, where one lives, in the familiarity of um, those around us, and so on? These are all things that we can pause right now for a bit of reflection. So I ask that you take a few deep breaths, and we'll come back together in a bit. So I think when we look at the whole idea of catastrophe and calamities that have befallen us, um, so much of our emphasis as modern Jews has been placed upon certainly the wars of independence and the other wars in Israel, but in addition to that, the Holocaust. And although only 72 years ago or 73 years ago, it feels as if it is a much longer time. And I think certainly for some of our younger generation who have grandparents who or great grandparents who experienced living through World War II and living through some of these other calamities, the idea of the Holocaust and the Shoah is not so much a personalized experience as a learned experience and a shared experience from those people in their lives who may have served in the military or been through the Depression or gone through any one of these other very difficult periods of time. So the challenge on Tisha B'Av is to really find those difficulties, those calamities and catastrophes, those plagues, which we can all relate to in our time and in our day, in order to make this memorial more a more deepened experience for us. So I don't think that there is anybody who, on this particular day, if you've at all been living in the real world, wouldn't be thinking about the current pandemic and how this has really changed our lives. It may not have changed our lives as much as having our beloved temple destroyed in Jerusalem and having your children and wives and husbands carried away into Babylonian or Roman exile. But in many ways, we are experiencing a similar fear, a similar uncertainty, a similar sense of not knowing what comes next, and absolutely a sense of loneliness and isolation, which, by the way, are two very different things. Someone can be isolated and not feel lonely, and someone can be in a room full of people and have dozens of friends and still feel lonely. So I don't use those two words interchangeably. But I think that COVID has made us all aware in so many different ways about our own mortality, our own fragility, You may know of somebody who's been sick, or God forbid, somebody who's died. We all know people on the front lines, doctors, nurses, healthcare workers. You see them every day where you live, and it's a scary time. It's a frightening time. And mainly what makes it frightening is trying to find a clearing in the path, trying to find the sunlight streaming through the trees at the end of the trail, trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And we're all living through this together. None of us know how it's going to end. None of us know really what's going on. We're all praying, of course, that science will find a cure or a vaccine or something that will help us out of this terrible, terrible time. But in the meantime, we're frightened. And so I want to read to you a portion of Psalm 118, verse 6, and then a interpretive poem based on that by Devon Spear called Holy, Sick, and Afraid. The Lord is with me, for me, on my side. I will not fear. The psalmist's voice breaks, and I feel a generational tickle in the back of my throat. I will not be afraid. I will not be afraid. I am so wholly afraid. I, who am sick, who will be sick, who feel some sickness limb to limb every day, shaking, begin now to pray. Let this mask protect me, but not efface me. And as I face you and you me, may we look upon each other to face what we can no longer face alone. To be human is to be sick. To be sick is to be human. And we shall be holy. From the very bottom of these unholy depths, a song and our singing. So the psalmist is saying, as afraid as I am, I will not be afraid. And even with this illness all around me, God is with me. And so I don't fear. But then I fear. And I have trepidation. And I don't know where this is going. But God is with me. On Breathing by Alicia Jo Rabins. I'm okay during the day, but at night I get scared, which makes it hard to breathe, which is a symptom of the pandemic, which is what scares me. Well played, anxiety, my old friend. You've always warned me something like this might happen. You're a gift from my ancestors who survived plagues and worse. They wove you into my DNA to warn me, so that I too might survive. Now that it's happening, anxiety, I don't need you anymore. I need the ones who gave you to me. Hear me, ancestors who lived through danger times. I'm ready for you now. All these years I've carried your worries in my bones. Now I need your love, your 1,000-year view. Tell me it's going to be okay. Remind me you made it through, and we will too. Teach me to breathe. And this was written by Alicia Jo Rabins after she had spent 10 weeks sheltering in place. And I think that it speaks to a lot of the identical feelings that we're all feeling. The anxiety as a gift from our ancestors, Jews are warriors. It's kind of woven into our DNA. We've carried these worries in our bones for all these years. And yet, when you look at the history of Jews for millennia, we have survived, and we have prevailed, and we have persisted, and we have been resilient. And regardless of what has come our way, whether it was a wholesale attempt to wipe us off the face of the earth, whether it was a destruction and being hauled off to a foreign land into exile, or whether it was a plague, which we read about frequently in the Jewish Bible, we know that we can prevail. And we have to hold on to our history and hold on to our tradition and know that we will move through even this difficult, terrible time. The following is a poem from Rabbi Sarah Friedson called God of Truth. And I hope you'll forgive the expletive in the first line, but it's really not too bad. God of Truth. What the hell, God? Are you crying too? Do you see your beloved children dying? Do you see our fear? I'm scared of the virus, of the hate and mistrust, of the tearing apart of my stability. The ground shakes beneath my feet. I want to lead, God, but to where? I'm in the wilderness and so far from home, the one we left and the one we will build. Did your heart break too when the precious 7-year-old asked if I wasn't feeling good because of the coronavirus? When she asked if I was going to die? Mine did. A crack, razor thin. I promised I wouldn't. Don't make me a liar, God of truth. What remains? The walls have fallen down, and what remains is pure, so pure. Pretense gone, values remain. My clothes don't matter, my soul does. A reminder, each life, each soul, each breath is precious. We are so beautifully vulnerable and brave, your children. Things change. We adapt. The sun still shines, and yesterday I saw a butterfly. And I think during times like this, during times of calamity, during times of extreme, intense emotion and uncertainty and fear, we begin to notice the smaller things and to identify that which is truly important. Our lives, our souls, our friends, our surroundings. And it's those little things that become far more important. The earth is green again, and I strive to feed my neighbors. A community without a building remains a community. My relationships deepen. Thank you. My exercise becomes more consistent. Thank you. The 4 of us are becoming a family. Thank you. We play every day. Thank you. And you're hearing this more and more, right? Families are really spending time together. They're doing puzzles and they're reading books and they're singing and they're playing instruments and they're creating amazing videos and getting to know one another in a way that they've not yet gotten to know one another. I've spoken to families who are having bi-weekly or monthly Zoom calls with extended family that they have not seen or talked to in years. And so all of these are the silver linings that are kind of interwoven throughout the anxiety and the fear. For a roof and nourishing food, thank you. For growing children, thank you. For my health, thank you. For their health, thank you. For technology to stay in touch, thank you. For wisdom and creativity, thank you. For resilience and flexibility, thank you. For 8 glorious hours of sleep every single night, thank you. For laughter and books, thank you. For the growth that will come, thank you. For the privilege of serving you, O Holy One, thank you. So even though on Tisha B'Av, we're not permitted to celebrate any joyous occasions, there are no joyous life cycle events, no weddings, no bar mitzvahs, nothing of that nature. We're not supposed to say Shehechianu, but we can still take a look at this continuum that says, yes, we're in the middle of this pandemic. It is frightening. It is uncertain. But thank God my family is healthy. Thank God I have food. Thank God I have a roof over my head. Thank God for my health. Thank God for my family's health. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the more we focus on those thank yous, the more our resilience grows, the more our flexibility grows, and the greater the likelihood that we will move through this, get to the other side, and be able to look back on it as a time of incredible growth for us and for the people we love. Following poem called Forgive Me. Can you forgive me, God, source of everything, for all I took for granted? The bus that whisked the girls off to school, the dinners out because we didn't feel like cooking, handshakes, hugs, and group singing, birthday parties and bar mitzvah celebrations, and the sorrow that rippled through the crowd assembled at a funeral, the seemingly endless possibilities nestled in the library shelves. Can you forgive me for not appreciating every small, precious, mundane moment of working alone in a dedicated office, of the rush of energy and joy in teaching, those invisible exchanges of knowledge and self, of the small talk with shopkeepers and schmoozing at Kiddush? So many miracles I never saw, let alone expressed my gratitude for. And now, every breath is worthy of praise. Each connection pierces the loneliness. I am so grateful for this messy house, and this shedding dog, and this imperfect family, and the gift of each and every blessed day. So just the simple act of putting your kids on a school bus, or going to see the kids in a play at school, or a concert, or being too tired to cook one night and being able to go out and eat because you don't have the proper groceries in the refrigerator to make a meal, or any of these mundane things that we so take for granted, that now, while we're living in this period of solitude and isolation, can we continue to thank God? And more importantly, do we have the courage to ask God to forgive us for not continuing to see the miracles? So I want to take just a few minutes now for silent reflection, to think about gratitude, to think about forgiveness. What are the mundane, everyday, ordinary events that happen in your life that you are not participating in right now? And what are those things for which you are grateful? So we're going to take a few moments now again, just to close our eyes and reflect on that question, and then we'll come back together. I'm going to conclude our program this morning by reading a more traditional reading from for Tisha B'Av by Chaim Stern and Henry Cohen. And we'll follow that with the Mourner's Kaddish, which is traditional to say. And then I'm going to ask you to join me in Hashivenu. Help us to return one more time. We have lived in numberless towns and villages, and in too many of them we have endured cruel suffering. Some we have forgotten, others are sealed in our memory. A wound that does not heal. 100 generations of victims and martyrs, still their blood cries out from the earth. And so many at Dachau, at Buchenwald, at Babi Yar. What can we say? What can we do? How bear the unbearable, or accept what life has brought to our people? All who are born must die. But how shall we compare the slow passage of time with the callous slaughter of the innocent, cut off before their time? They lived with faith, not all, but many, and surely many died, with faith in God, in life, in the goodness that even flames cannot destroy. May we find a way to the strength of that faith, that trust, that sure sense that life and soul endure beyond this body's breath. They have left their lives to us. Let a million prayers rise wherever Jews worship. A million candles glow against the darkness of these unfinished lives. And so we recite Mourner's Kaddish in memory of all of those who have perished in acts of violence and destruction, acts that were designed to try to rid the world of Jews. And we recite Kaddish together, and then we'll sing together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv yimru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mavorach le'olam ul'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'yimru. Amen. Please join me. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai elecha, v'na shuva, v'na shuva. Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu keke edem. Turn us, Adonai, eternal, toward you, and we will turn. Make our days new again, like long ago. Amen. That concludes this service. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I will see you tomorrow evening at 4:45 for Shabbat blessings, then on Saturday morning for Shabbat services at 10 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon for Shabbat Chaverim. Lehitraot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.